Hello and welcome into the Bird's Eye View podcast. We are here on Monday, July 28th, as the Toronto Blue Jays enter trade deadline week with the best record in baseball. I'm your host, Zach Worden, joined as always by Jori Negin-Shecter. And Jori, how are we feeling about these Toronto Blue Jays coming off a series win over the Detroit Tigers, and as they have the best record in the majors ahead of this pretty pivotal week here?
Yeah, once again, proven that this is for real. Taking 3 out of 4 from the Detroit Tigers. Obviously, Sunday's game doesn't go the way they presumably envisioned, but
You can't win
you
them
know,
all.
bef even before Chad Green comes in, and they come out for the bottom of the ninth, and they put up a bunch of runs anyways. So who knows if they don't put Chad Green in, how that one goes. But needless to say, the uh, the Jays are cooking. And it's going to be a really exciting week for the Blue Jays. Obviously, some options off the board. Some teams have jumped the market, some teams have extended their pieces already. So, as we record this podcast, things are continuing to change, but in the meantime, plenty of potential options, plenty of potential possibilities for the Blue Jays ahead of the trade deadline oh my God, what month is it?
Thursday.
Thursday. There we go.
Well, of course, we mentioned obviously the Tiger series, it all goes well, but we are here to do a bit of a deadline preview today. Of course, the Blue Jays, it seems like they are very heavily in the pitching market, specifically on the relief side of things. And, the question really is at this point, are they going to go out and add a starter? Are they going to add a bat? Like, how big are they going to swing? I think is realistically the kind of question at this point. And I mean, you're first place in the league. It seems like a pretty good time to swing big if there ever was one.
I mean, yeah, like it kind of goes without saying, this is about as good an opportunity as you're gonna get to take a big swing. Now, I don't know who the big fish are, and we'll get into that more just in a few moments, but if an opportunity does present itself, you got to figure they take a hack at it.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, when you're looking at who's kind of available right now, the biggest possibilities I would say are like Joe Ryan, Mackenzie Gore, if those guys are even available, Stephen Kwan, like those are the types of like all-star level talents that any team would love to have. But of course, they all have team control. All are going to come at a significant cost. And when you look, outside of that kind of group, you're looking at Gino Suarez, you're looking at, um, you know, who else really behind that? Like Merrill Kelly, Mitch Keller, Edward Cabrera, Sandy Alcantara, Zach Gallen. It's not the most inspiring group. It could be, if Sandy and Gallen were kind of pitching better than they have. But I think there's a certain number of relief options that are pretty exciting, which is, of course, the market that the Blue Jays are most likely to be heavy in. So, I think for you, when you're, assessing what they're going to do, I mean, what are your kind of priorities for them, as far as, what type of talent they should be going for?
I mean, the bullpen stuff obviously screams Blue Jays. You'd love to knock a couple guys down a peg or two. You don't even need to go swing and go get, a Yohan Duran type, even though that'd be really nice. But they are going to have to add at least one leverage arm to the bullpen, and ideally,
Yeah.
I think two. I think this series, though, kind of gives you a little bit of confidence in the rotation. And obviously, it's one start respectively, but the Gosman and the Scherzer starts, even though Scherzer doesn't pick up the win, both of them just mowing down, albeit one of the teams or a team that's struggling lately, but one of the best teams
Yeah.
in the American League, right? So both of those guys look like they're part of a playoff rotation, and suddenly maybe you're not freaking out as much on the starting pitching side. Now, that said, of all the areas to add, that is the area I would say. It's really just a question of who you can go out and get. But it would be really fun to go out and take a hack at a Joe Ryan. To a lesser extent, maybe a Mitch Keller is a name that gets floated around. Not really a guy that moves the needle for you and I necessarily, but nevertheless would still probably start a playoff game for the Blue Jays.
So, I think when we started having deadline conversations a couple months ago, realistically at this point, I think it was kind of around the time that Scherzer came back and, Bowden Francis was getting sent down and, you weren't really too sure what Eric Lauer was going to be. But now, we're in this phase where Scherzer looks healthy. He hasn't, had any thumb complaints publicly. There hasn't been any sign that the thumb is bothering him anymore. I'm sure it still is, but, it's obviously not keeping him from pitching.
Well, he
So.
was saying even on the pregame, like he's opening bottles with his left hand instead of his right hand to
Mm,
protect it. So he sounds like
yeah.
he's being extra cautious.
So obviously, things are going well there. Eric Lauer has pitched maybe the best of like anybody on this team. If you're looking solely at ERA, that is certainly the case. And so, they kind of have like this five-man group locked in, but I think kind of, a couple months ago we were talking like, if even if Scherzer and Lauer both are good between then and the deadline, you still need to add a starter because, one, Scherzer's thumb thing can flare up at any time, and two, Eric Lauer, is a guy who was realistically pitching in Korea last year, right? So does the Linsanity run end eventually, or is this kind of a guy who can realistically kind of return to that form that he has shown so far and that he was, earlier in his career with the Brewers. And then of course, as well into that calculation is that if any of those guys, any of those five guys do get hurt, then you don't really have kind of that fifth option to slide in, right? Like Bowden Francis isn't coming back anytime soon. Alek Manoah, again, not somebody I don't think you can trust at this point to realistically put into the rotation. And then, if you want to say like Lazaro Estrada or Adam Macko are going to be realistic options for that spot, I think you're leaving a lot to chance for a team that has aspirations of winning the division and getting a first round bye. So where do you stand now, given that Lauer and Scherzer have kind of outperformed expectations, we'll say, with this rotation?
Just the the biggest question mark to me is where it all kind of fits, right? Like they've both done
Yeah.
more than admirably. So to me, there's no reason to go out and try to necessarily replace them. It's more a case of wanting to bump them down, right?
Yeah,
So if
I
you
think
can't find someone that gets them, you know, uh, out of the rotation, but I don't even want to take those guys out of the rotation at this
yeah.
point, right? So
I think realistically the case is you either look to add to the top, but you should look to add to the bottom. You know what I mean? Like a sixth. Like if you can get a six starter, give you depth, give you an option, like maybe a guy who can pitch in bulk. I know I think I've seen some connections to Steven Matz, like that type. A guy who can be a starter but can also pitch in relief. A Michael Soroka who, has experience as a reliever, has been starting, a guy who can kind of fill in a pinch if you need an extra starter or anything like that. But I think, you mentioned Mitch Keller, right? Like Mitch Keller is kind of slotting into the middle of that rotation and doesn't have, experience pitching in relief recently. So where exactly does he fit? Like he doesn't have exactly a smooth fit, right? Like I think you either need to add a clear piece at the top of the rotation if it's available, and if not, then just kind of add a guy who can give you some starts if you need down the stretch, but can also be effective as a reliever.
like Soroka, you mentioned him, seems like he makes a lot of sense. I just wonder if the cost of him would be
I
worth what
mean,
you're.
yeah, he's a rental though, right? So
It's a rental, but I mean, even as a rental, he's had a really strong season. Would you expect to pay fifth starter rental for him? I'm not sure that would be the case, but he seems like he makes the most sense if strictly we're discussing a guy with a bit of swingman capabilities.
yeah, I guess it's kind of interesting to see what the price would be for that type of starter. I think when you look at, I'm trying to think of guys who got moved in the past that kind of fit that same bill. I think that the price probably wouldn't be a ton. Like I know that there's kind of been some reporting like the Nationals are asking a ton for him, but I would assume that that kind of comes down in the next few days because again, they're not a postseason team. Um, you almost like sign him hoping to trade him, I guess would be the case, right? Like you if you're not going to compete, then what's the point of holding on to him?
Yeah, the idea is to maximize the return on him at the end of the day, basically, right? I would say like he's a guy that piques my interest, but beyond that, it really is just it feels like you're going to be looking for. I mean, you kind of outlined it, right? Guys to raise the floor almost on the pitching rotation should something happen. Now, with that said, I mean obviously you don't want them starting a playoff game or necessarily down the stretch, but Lazaro Estrada looked more than comfortable in his big league debut. And I don't know where you stand on an Adam Mako type, but I feel like he could probably fill in a pinch. I mean, Alek Manoah is going to be eventually a backup at the big leagues, probably closer to September, but will certainly be capable of at least kind of working as an opener type.
All right, so
So
here, sorry, I just like trying to find some comps for like what a Soroka trade might look like. I think Frankie Montas last year, he gets dealt. He was a pending free agent, but probably a little bit more like he a little bit more established, a little bit
a
more
little
of a
more
pedigree,
pedigree.
right? And he got traded to the Brewers by the Reds for Joey Weimer, Jacob Junis, and cash.
Not a not a not a blow the doors off, although Joey Weimer's a
It's like
guy-ish.
I think it would basically be like if you're putting that comp on the Blue Jays, it would be like one of their 4A depth types, like I don't think you're moving Class A. I don't think you're moving Loperfido in a trade like that. But, if you look at like a guy who's in AAA like
I mean,
Shrek, maybe, but
yeah,
again, like I don't know if you really want to do that. Of course, we're maybe a little more prospect forward on this podcast. So, I think at the end of the day, if you move a guy like Shrek, you do want like a little bit more. I don't know. What do you think?
yeah. I mean, you're probably gonna have to overpay at the deadline just in
Yeah.
general, as a rule of thumb. That's probably in the ballpark of what it might cost. Someone that I've seen the name floated around a lot, just as a guy to swing for within the J system in terms of like assets. Is is there anybody that you've seen shopped around, so to speak, as much as King, Johnny King?
No, it's kind of funny. I do want to do like kind of a whole prospect thing like a little bit later, but it's they have like this group of pitchers, right? Like you have the Savage who I think is like kind of in his own tier, and then you have Cal Steven, Jerron Watts Brown, Kendry Rojas, and Johnny King who are in like the second tier, and you know that teams are just like salivating over that group, right? Because beyond that, you can put Gage Stanford in that group as well, but like beyond those five. Like those are the five like prime trade assets that the Blue Jays have, and you know that teams are looking at those. Like, can you imagine how heavy that those guys have been scouted in the last like couple weeks here?
That's probably what that Dodger scout was looking for at the Vancouver Canadians game.
Yeah, it'll be kind of interesting, but yeah, I think we can as far as like this the starting pitching candidates. I mean, like we can do the Joe Ryan Mackenzie Gore thing.
Well, Sandy, I mean, we kind of floated his name
Sandy,
before. Where are you at on Sandy? Because
he's been
if
looking
I
better.
if I recall correctly, by Stuff Plus, his metrics are all, I believe, in the positive at this point. I think that by and large he's gotten poor results, but the process it kind of sounds like has been at least passable.
He's just not striking anybody out. And I know that he's never been like a huge strikeout guy, but like the strikeout stuff is just kind of not quite been there. I don't know. I just feel like when you're looking to like you want to like get that bona fide ace who isn't necessarily a project, and I know that they have a lot of confidence in Pete Walker and being able to kind of fix pitchers, but I just feel like you bring in Sandy like there's and he pitches to a 6 ERA the rest of the way. Then it's like why would you have made that trade?
How buy low would it have to be to make
Hmm.
Sandy appealing?
What do you think that they want? Like he
They're looking
has
for that group of pitchers, probably
yeah,
two
like
guys
he
from
he
that
has
group.
he has this year and next year and then a club option for 27 on like a pretty cheap deal. So
I mean, maybe you look at him
yeah,
as a Chris Bassett replacement.
I mean that's a kind of thing, right? Like I think we talked about this with Mitch Keller, where Mitch Keller to me would be a fine trade to make in the offseason because you're gonna have holes in the rotation that you need to fill, and he's a guy who is a fine starter. But I think when you're kind of looking for maybe a little more impact heading down the stretch here, you don't just need a guy who's gonna come in and eat up some innings for you because you already have, a bunch of guys that are doing that. So I think Sandy like kind of falls into that boat for me. I would be extremely cautious about, giving up premium assets for him when like say that you go out and you trade Cal Steven for him, right? And then that probably impacts the way that you are going to approach your other trades, right? So if you're trading for Sandy, is that going to cost you a chance at acquiring like a David Bednar? Like to me, I would probably be more intrigued in going after like two really, really good relievers than adding and then taking a flyer on Sandy and kind of, using the assets that way.
Yeah, like you just mentioned him, right? David Bednar is another guy that the Jays have been linked to pretty heavily. I mean, several teams have. And he'd be a guy that would probably slot in as your setup guy, maybe behind Hoffman, could presumably even close.
Yeah.
I mean, has lots of experience doing that. Would probably be a more intriguing ad than Sandy, but wouldn't necessarily be a headliner of a deadline, I feel like.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's fair. Like, do you think that they're going to like get that type of headliner type? Is that like something that it's going to be, or is it going to be more like we're going to add Bednar, we're going to add, um, what other kind of reliever is out there? Like, a Pete Fairbanks
Like a
and
Danny
Ramon Laureano.
Colombi
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I mean
Exactly.
the sensible choice is to, grab a couple pieces that you like and go out and work off of that. But I do feel like when you have a chance to swing, like this one, when they're first in the league,
Yeah.
and you've potentially got guys like Bo Bichette out the door. You've got guys like Chris Bassett potentially out the door.
Who
It
who
seems
is your
like
s- who is the swing though? I guess is realistically the kind of the
I
question.
guess it's Joe Ryan. I don't know who else could be in that group, and it's going to cost you a high level or a high level arm, and then maybe a low miner's arm, plus maybe.
Yeah, honestly, I think if you're doing the Joe Ryan Mackenzie Gore thing, it is you Savage and Namala, and then maybe more.
I mean, I feel like I would maybe not be willing to part with both of those guys, but I think you can take a swing at one of those with one of those guys. I think you can do that.
It's it's definitely one of those things where I think if you because they both have team control, right? Like to me, it's fine. It's fine to at least like entertain trading them when you're getting somebody that's going to be on your team for multiple seasons, right? Like you're not trading either of those guys for Zach Gallen. You're not
No.
trading either of those guys for Merrill Kelly, for David Bednar, right? Like those are the types of guys that you like you want to have, but Namala and Savage, like they've built up a ton of goodwill with their farm system. They have some guys with legitimate ceiling on their raw in their farm system right now, which they kind of haven't had for the past few years. And you can I don't think you can just throw that away for a playoff run. But if you can, kind of get that playoff run and years of control, then, I'm probably okay with them listening on those types of trades.
So based on your sense of what the Jays have to offer and based on, you think the likelihood of them going out and getting these guys, because you just mentioned them and we haven't really talked about them very much. Diamondbacks look like they're selling. And then, of course, you've got Merrill Kelly and Zach Gallen there.
Yeah.
What's your sense on those two and what that might cost and the likelihood that the Jays go for that as rentals as opposed to shopping at the top of the market elsewhere where there's more team control?
Gallon fits into the same bucket as Sandy for me, except for obviously he has, just this year of team control. Um, I just, yeah, again, like I just feel like there's something off there. I don't feel like adding a project is necessarily what you want to do right now. I do like Merrill Kelly as a potential ad, but again, he's kind of in that boat of like pitchers that are going to come in and like, is he going to start in a playoff series for you, right? Like, is he going to be one of these guys that you give the ball to in a wild card in an ALDS? Um, I think you look at him like he's been a top 30 pitcher in baseball this year by Sierra, um, which is obviously, really, really good. And it's a really, really good pitcher. But again, if he's not coming in to top your rotation, if he's not coming in to be a playoff starter, like who would you give Merrill Kelly the ball over in a playoff game?
Maybe Eric Lauer. And I don't think Eric Lauer is getting the ball in a playoff game at this stage. Although, again, that could change. I mean, he could continue to pitch really well over the next 2 months. And all of a sudden, you're like, well, we're not going to not start the lefty with a 2.5 ERA.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, And then, you look at the cost that it'll be to acquire him, which again, is probably from that group of like double A pitchers. I would assume that it's like one of those guys and then maybe another lower level prospect. You kind of look at like the Josh Naylor trade, right? Like you give um, a major, like a triple A pitcher who's on the cusp of the majors and then a lower level guy. I think you look at that group of Blue Jays guys and you feel pretty confident that those are like, I think you can probably consider them triple A types. And then a lower level guy as well. And, I think, yeah, I would be hesitant to pay that price. I would understand if they did it, because, I was kind of locked in on Merrill Kelly early. But now, maybe a little less so given how Scherzer and Lauer have pitched.
Well, I mean, I haven't even just kind of got your thoughts on where the Scherzer and the Lauer stuff changes the dynamics, changes the situation on the deadline front.
Yeah. It's such a tough conversation because I feel like, things can change any day. And I think it realistically just kind of comes down to you either add the ace or you add the guy who can give you a little bit of depth, the Soroka or the Mats, and kind of go from there. I think I've kind of talked myself out of the middle of the market, like those Merrill Kellys, the Mitch Kellers. Like I think that it makes most sense for them to either take the big swing and get the guy to top the rotation if they do come available, and if not, then you add a guy who can kind of step in at the back end if any of those guys do falter.
Yeah, and I think that would be sensible. I just don't know how exciting that would be for the Blue Jays. And I feel like now is as good a time as any to take a swing.
Yeah. What do you think about like some of these other types? Like Edward Cabrera. I'm like an Edward Cabrera fan. But again, he kind of does fit into that group of like, are you giving him the ball in a playoff game? I'm like probably because he has been pretty good this year. You look at the strikeouts are there. His command has been way, way better this year. And his ERA is 3.48. The Sierra is 3.7. Like it's a really good pitcher. How do you feel about him? And he's a guy who also does have that type of team control. But again, then are you kind of dipping into that Namala Savage group?
Yeah, I think that's kind of exactly it, right? It's not as sexy, it's not as exciting an ad as a Joe Ryan type, as maybe not a starter, but the Yohan Duran types. Um, but it's still probably going to cost you a comparable return, maybe slight discount, but you are going to probably have to dip into those top end guys because of how much team control he has. I think he's only at about 3 years of service time or less, right?
He's yeah, he becomes arbitration eligible this year and then a free agent after 2028. So
You have him for a long time.
yeah. Yeah, it'll be he would be a guy where like if they swung that trade, I can be like, yeah, that makes sense. Um you know. What if they galaxy brained it? You trade for a guy like Edward Cabrera, and then you flip one of your starters, like Chris Bassett or Jose Barrios in another trade, and then you rejig your rotation that way. But then I feel like you're in the exact same position that you are now.
Yeah, you've kind of you've kind of done a lot of
A lot of work
shuffling.
for nothing. Yeah, it's you got to do your off-season work ahead of time. You know, you got to get those guys locked in. It's going to be a busy offseason though. You know, as we kind of that's the one thing that I think like I mean, obviously they have so many guys that are kind of expiring and coming up, but when you look at um what they kind of need to do, it's really interesting because you know I know that they love to do work early and add pieces before you know they kind of need to, right? Like take care of business now instead of doing it in the off season. But I just really feel like those guys with team control like maybe don't fit the roster. And that's like kind of the weird thing about this deadline, right? Is like that they've been playing so well and that they're getting production from almost every single spot on the roster that it makes it tough to kind of look at who are we going to replace, right? Like when you look at like Joey Loperfido's playing so well, Davis Schneider's playing so well. You know, we just did so much talk on the rotation. Um, Obviously the bullpen, I think it's pretty obvious to see who's going to need replacing there. But when you look at like the lineup and the rotation, like there's just not really a glaring weakness, I would say. But you know, it feels like if you're going to be this contender, that you kind of need to upgrade those spots regardless of like what you've seen over the past month.
Yeah, the floor is there for this team, and baseball's a weak link sport. It's not driven by the stars, but Jay certainly could use another star or two, just because that's just the nature of the beast. If you have a guy that can get out the best hitters in baseball, if you have a guy that can rack up hits against the best pitchers in baseball, it's gonna make your life a lot easier. Now we haven't really talked about the hitting side. And I think there's a reason for that. The emergence of Davis Schneider once again, the emergence of Joey Loperfido. Do they even need to add on the hitting side at this point?
Again, like I mean, if you can add a Geno Suarez, do you do it?
I think so.
I think, oh, man, like it's such a tough conversation because
Well,
like
who
all these.
is who is Geno Suarez knocking off the roster?
Well, I think that he would come in and he pushes Barger to right full time. Basically, you're looking at a Clement Jimenez platoon at second, I would say, if that's the case. And then Springer DHs full time, which then, you know, Leo Jimenez probably gets sent to the minors in that case because once, you know, Andres comes back, then that's kind of the shuffle that you have there. So I think like that's like a pretty clean fit. I know like Suarez hasn't been very good defensively, but
Well,
you know,
that's what
I
I was
think
wondering. Do you maybe talk about him being the full-time DH?
well,
I mean,
Springer's been pretty bad in right too, so
I know, so you kind of don't
I,
have that
I think
luxury.
that you
Or
don't want
can
to
he
like
move to
sacrifice Springer's
first? Do you
success.
do you do you think about Suarez? Does he
Vladdy at
play?
third, bring him back to third.
I don't know. The problem with Suarez is he fits the Jays' needs offensively, but defensively doesn't fit anywhere.
I think you're probably fine with him at third base. It's kind of funny because we had like the conversation in the offseason where it was like, you know, Vlad and Bo on the left side of the infield. You don't really want that. But I think Bo's been solid enough at short where, you know, you haven't really like noticed him this year, which I think is a good thing. Um, but yeah, I think, you know, if you can bring in Suarez, like you do it because it's a guy with like 40 home runs already. And you know, adding that type of power would certainly help them in the postseason. I mean, can you imagine like the insert whoever you want leading off like Nathan Lucas, George Springer, Vlad, Bo, Barger, then Suarez, or whatever order you want to line them up in, like that's pretty terrifying for any pitcher to have to go
So
through.
a pretty gnarly starting lineup. I mean, I do think Suarez would be a really fun ad. He feels antithetical to everything that this front office has done in years past, but it would make so much sense. And I also don't think that he would necessarily cost you a Namala or a Savage.
Yeah, what was it that the Yankees turned down? There was like a AAA prospect or a AAA or MLB like MLB type. So again, like Loperfido, you know, that type. And then a double A pitcher and like a lower level guy. Is that what it was?
I didn't actually see the rumored return on him, but I mean, to me, I think you
Yeah.
could get him by headlining someone from that kind of mushy group of five-ish starting pitchers at the either high A or double A level.
So here's Francis Romero reported, this was yesterday, that the talks between the Yankees and Diamondbacks stalled after Arizona asked for an MLB player, an upper level prospect, and at least one lower level prospect. So again, Joey Loperfido, Cal Steven, and some high A third baseman, Sean Keys.
I mean, I would probably do that. I'd probably pull the trigger on that.
Yeah. Or, even if you wanted to like clear nah, that doesn't work. I was gonna say like try and clear somebody from the major league roster that like opens a spot for Suarez, but you're not moving Barger. I don't think Ernie Clement is maybe doing it for the Diamondbacks. So certainly possibilities there. But like I mean, outside of him, what kind of area do you think that would be, or what type of player would be the best fit for them in any potential trade on the position player front?
I do think that they're looking probably at an infielder as the most sensible fit.
I
I
think
think
it's
that
just basically a right-handed hitter. Is
I
that
think that's kind of it, right? I mean, David Schneider's been so good that a lot of my fears about needing to add a guy that can mash lefties certainly have faded to a certain extent, but you could probably use at least one guy. I just don't know where exactly they fit in the lineup, right? It's to a lesser extent a bit of a redux with the back of the rotation where you don't want to kick an Eric Lauer to
yeah.
the bullpen to AAA. You don't want to kick a David Schneider to the bench to AAA.
Yeah.
You've got some stuff that's working right now. And unless it's a guy that can move the needle, I'm not sure how much it makes a lot of sense to go out and try to add a chip shot type.
All right. Walk with me here. We're going to run through the Blue Jays position player scenario over the next couple weeks. So Dalton Varsho, I guess maybe he's coming back like today, maybe tomorrow for the doubleheader. We'll kind of see, but he'll be back. So likely he comes back, and I would guess that sends Leo Jimenez back to, or Alan Roden back to the minors. We'll say that's the case there. Varsho back, Roden down, Will Wagner back, Jimenez down.
One
Leo.
or the other, probably flip a coin, and one of those two ends up going down. I
So
think to even to a certain extent, maybe Wagner makes more sense just because of the maybe lack of defensive versatility in relative terms, but he's been hitting
sure.
it.
Yeah. So we'll say so Varsho and Wagner are back probably before the deadline, which sends Rodin and Leo Jimenez down. We'll say that because Clement can handle short or whatever. And then you get Andres Jimenez back, and then you're talking about is it Loper Fido? Is it Davis Schneider? Um, who is kind of the guy that gets sent down for Jimenez?
I mean, have we sent Will Wagner down yet? I
No,
mean,
sure. Yeah, you're right. You're right. So Will Wagner will go down in that case. So now we're looking at, well, and then of course Kirk comes back, Alex Sanchez goes down. So now the 13 players that we have on the Major League roster in this scenario, I don't even know what to make of Anthony Santander at this point. I think you basically have to consider that he's not going to be back this year. So right now we've got Nathan Lucas, George Springer, Vlad, Bo, Barger, Ernie, Loperfido, Kirk, Heineman, Davis Schneider, Miles Straw, and then Jimenez. Uh, who did I not say? Jimenez, Varsho, and did I say Kirk or Heineman? And so that's your 13. So in that scenario, like your bench is Heineman, Schneider, Straw, and probably Joey Loperfido.
who sticks out like a sore thumb there?
Well, do you think that they would send him down?
Well, are we talking about the same dude?
We're talking about Miles Straw, yeah.
We're talking about Miles Straw. I don't know if they'd send him down. He fits as a 26th man that can play a really strong center field, but once Dalton Varsho comes back, it's a bit of a redundancy, and he's not exactly a slugger out here. he feels like a guy that you could probably look at upgrading on.
Yeah, I don't disagree because, Varsho's back, and then you've got, you got enough guys that can play center. Loperfido, Lucas, and again, like Varsho's an everyday player, so you're going to have him out there. So I don't think, you're necessarily looking at that. I think the one thing that Straw does nicely is like kind of give you that pinch runner in the playoffs, which, you know, y- going through their 2023 playoff roster and like
But
Cam Eden was on it.
I also think that, you know, I think once you get to the playoffs, maybe you kick a reliever or two off the
Yeah.
roster and you go a little deeper on the bench side, right? Because you maybe go with a four-man rotation, you keep the eight-man bullpen, and that gives you an additional spot that you can maybe toss to a pinch runner type like a Miles Straw.
Yeah. So, but if you're replacing the Miles Straw spot on the bench with like say a right-handed slugger or whatever, a Ramon Laureano type, then what's the point of having Laureano and Davis Schneider together?
Yeah, then there's a certain redundancy. Maybe that's the guy that goes in favor of a Gino Suarez. I mean, as much as not to go right back to what we were discussing before, but maybe you sacrifice a little bit of defense for offense, but it's maybe on the depth front instead of a specific player losing playing time
Yeah.
and having to go the other way. I mean, it does feel like Miles Straw is kind of teetering on odd man out territory, which is fascinating because if you want to talk, folk heroes of the team, I feel like he's
Yeah.
probably among
I
the
think
leaders on
he
that.
just like has so much utility as like a player on the roster. Like
What do
he's a tough at bat. He's a good outfielder. He's a good base runner. He's going to steal some bases. And
I just
I don't want to talk about what I said before the season.
I was just about to say, what a turn of events where somehow we have flipped positions here, where I was the one at the beginning of
I
the
know.
season being like, I feel like he might play. And you were like, if he plays a game for what he represents, you can't let it happen. And now we get to the deadline, and all of a sudden you're the number one Miles Straw fan here. I don't know. I don't think he's a guy that you can get too attached to. And I recognize
Yeah.
obviously the salary commitment. I recognize that he's still got, I believe he's got another year or two even on the deal, right? Like
Yeah.
he's not gone after the season. But to me, I think that that's exactly the type of guy that is a folk hero type because they come in a pinch. But when you need a guy, he's not necessarily someone
Yeah.
you want playing meaningful anything really. This episode of the Bird's Eye View podcast is brought to you by BioSteel. Use code Bird's Eye View at checkout for 20% off your order at biosteel.ca. Again, that's code Bird's Eye View at checkout for 20% off your order. For all your high performance hydration needs, visit biosteel.ca. Thank you again to BioSteel for sponsoring today's episode.
All right. So, I mean, looking at like just some of the position players who may be available, Stephen Kwan, I think kind of like fits into a different category of type of player where it's like you'd have to give up so much for him as well, and he would be an everyday starter. So I don't think that we really need to, have that conversation. Would be super fun. Would love to have Stephen Kwan. Think he'd fit the team great. Don't have much else to say there. Jaron Duran, kind of same thing. I just don't think that the fit is as clean as Kwan there because he's been, not as good. And also, I just don't think necessarily kind of fits what the Blue Jays are building. And then beyond that, like Ryan O'Hearn, to me, again, Blue Jays probably don't need a left-handed hitter as desperately as they had in the past, so he's not necessarily quite a type there. Taylor Ward, I've always been pretty intrigued by Taylor Ward as a right-hander, but that's a guy that comes in, probably needs everyday playing time, right? So would he accept a platoon, a small side platoon? Doubt it.
Probably wouldn't be thrilled with
He
it.
has the team control though, so like maybe there could be something there. Maybe you could work that out, but
I don't
then
know. It feels like you'd probably be paying a lot for him because of
yeah,
the team control, and for what you're going to get out of him, probably wouldn't necessarily make the most sense.
Luis Robert.
Good luck.
Yeah, do you see that they're asking for Mark Vientos in a trade with the Mets for him?
Yeah, I'm not really sure how much that makes sense for either
Unless they're
party.
like unless they
Messy stuff.
value Aurelvis Martinez the same as Mark Vientos.
I mean, if they want to take a Ramos Martinez, by all means, I suppose.
All right. Ramon Laureano, really interesting. I think there's a pretty natural fit for him, but it's basically kind of the Davis Schneider spot on the roster. But Laureano has been like so good this year. Just kind of pulling it up at 136 WRC plus, 14 homers in 78 games as a platoon. Um, it's kind of funny because he's actually like just been raking against righties this year. Against righties, he's got a 154 WRC plus. Against lefties, it's 102. And he has, I believe, a team option for next year. Yeah, he does have a team option for next year, and it's a cheap team option. So I think that kind of complicates his price a little bit because it's a guy basically with 2 years of team control. Um, how much would you like? How much are you interested in Ramon Laureano?
Yeah, I think to me there's a level of interest, yes, but there's more intriguing fits, there's more intriguing ways to go out and spend your dollar than on a guy with kind of weird splits that don't necessarily fit what you're looking for. And the fit is clean on the position side, but is it clean in terms of the asking price? And I think there's just a lot of reasons to maybe look elsewhere, but he's a guy that I think you could maybe accept as a deadline ad, but not necessarily a top of the list, top of the wish list type.
Beyond that, I mean, there's Marcelo Zuna. Again, don't think he fits what the Blue Jays try to build.
Full-time
Adolis,
DH, that's not even
yeah, Adolis Garcia. Kind of interesting. Has been hitting the ball pretty hard this year, but has kind of been down the last 2 years. Um,
the Rangers are the hottest team in baseball in the second half, and they're
yeah,
in a wild card spot. I don't even think
well,
he's going to be
that's
traded.
maybe the second hottest team in baseball in the second half. Yeah,
Touche.
that's a good point. Don't think he's necessarily going anywhere. Cedric Mullins, again, kind of same thing as Luis Robert, but he's been bad. So is Robert actually. But um, one name that like kind of does interest me a little bit is Willie Castro from the Twins, who's set to be a free agent this year. Utility guy, so you can kind of slot him in a lot of places. He's a switch hitter. He doesn't, necessarily have like that drastic split. Like he's been really good against lefties. He has a 135 WRC plus against lefties. It's 108 against righties. Switch hitter, pending free agent. Like I said, kind of can slot in at a lot of places. I think he's been playing a lot of infield. Yeah, this year he's been at second a lot. He's been at third a lot. And he's also been in left and right a fair amount. So like, I mean, I think that would be a pretty decent fit.
Yeah, I think the fit's nice. I think I see where you can kind of go with that. I mean, again, not a guy that you want to necessarily headline your deadline, but I mean, if they can go out and get him at a reasonable acquisition cost, especially as a pending free agent, I think that's a guy that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I think the switch hitting and the like positional versatility, I think is makes him pretty intriguing because, it's not like a Gino Suarez or a Ramon Laureano where it's like you're bringing them in to do one thing, right? And they kind of have like one spot where they can play, but he can fill in at third, he can fill in at second, he can fill in at either of the corners. Like it's basically, I guess, like a switch hitting Davis Schneider, maybe a little bit less of a power threat, but I'd be intrigued. I think basically what you're doing with this trade spot is basically you're saying this is a guy that I'm willing to push either Davis Schneider or Miles Straw off the roster for. Or
Yeah,
Joey Lupifito, I guess, if
or
that's
Julio. Yeah.
that's a guy who you might have to trade anyways to get some of these players. But
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, we could rhyme off about a dozen names, but
you don't want me to keep
at the
going? Harrison Bader, Brian Hayes,
okay, Brian Hayes has no interest. No, thank you.
Isaiah Kiner Falefa.
Run it back. Listen, the Jays probably could use another bat. I wouldn't hate to add another guy, but I think it's different from the pitching side where you're really kind of swinging at the top of the market. Whereas with the hitting, I think
Yeah,
if you can find a puzzle
it's a
piece that maybe
very specific.
fits, it's a very specific need there for sure.
Yeah. All right, let's do the relievers because I think this is the part of the market that the Blue Jays are going to be most involved in, and we know that they need guys there. Obviously, you look at Jimmy Garcia, you don't really know what's going on there. You look at, the guys that they have in there right now, and yeah, Tommy Nance has pitched well. Justin Brule kind of had like his first really big blow up yesterday. So I think like, two bullpen arms, maybe three could be realistic. I also don't know what's going on with Nick Sandlin. We know Ryan Burr's done for the year. Paxton Schultz is on the IL. I don't think that's necessarily a guy that's going to prevent you from acquiring anybody else. But I'll let you go. I mean, who are the relievers that intrigue you most available?
Are we talking top of the market? Are we
Yeah, I mean,
talking?
there's again, there's like that a difference in like the guys who are available. Like there's the Duran, the Jaxes, the Class A's. Cade Smith kind of sounds like he's maybe actually off the table and not an option. But um, let's start with the top of the market. I mean, how much would you be willing to pay for those types?
Yeah, I think I'd be willing to mortgage a lot. I don't know if I'd be willing to mortgage the future,
Like
but
Yasavage Namala for Joan Duran. Yoan.
I don't think so. I don't think so. I don't think I'd do that. And
It's a
I
reliever.
know, listen, as I love to say, prospects fly forever, banners are only temporary, pennants are only temporary. But I feel like you could get comparable production to a Duran, to a, Class A for a cheaper price for like a Bednar type, who is also going to be at the top of the market, but isn't necessarily going to cost you all of your, bullets for the farm. If we want to talk a little lower, Columbia's the guy that gets tossed around. Danny Columbi,
Is it Columbia or is it Coulomb?
Coulomb. I'm actually not totally sure. I guess we'll learn when he becomes a Blue Jay.
There you go.
Another guy that's been tossed around, been floated around the last couple of days, Pete Fairbanks. Maybe
Ryan
as a
Helsley's in there.
guy, Ryan Helsley, even though I think he's got a little bit of the sticker price of a higher leverage guy of a top tier arm, but might not necessarily be that at this stage. I mean, I'm sure you can toss other names, and there's about 3 million relievers out there, and
Yeah.
I'm sure you can find one that makes sense. But I do think that it's similar to the rotation where I think that the Jays would be well advised to take a swing and go out and try to get someone
Yeah.
that really moves the needle. Not necessarily to be, give a boring answer, but it is really that type of season where adding at the top of the market makes so much sense, given you are
Yeah.
literally at the top of Major League Baseball standings.
Yeah. Um, I love Bednar. I think Bednar is like the perfect fit for them because, he fits in like he can be that fireman, he can be your closer, he can kind of fit in wherever you want. He's been, by Sierra, he's been a top 10 reliever in baseball this year. He's got 34.5% strikeout rate, 6.8% walk rate. Like he's just been absolutely fantastic. In a bounce back year for the Pirates, and of
Well,
course the Pirates are going to be, you know, sellers. And the thing
heavy
is, like, he
sellers.
he also comes with a year of team control as well.
Now, okay, before we get too far from him, any fears, any concerns,
Well,
anything there
we're
about last year and even the start of this year, if I recall correctly, also went down to AAA.
well, I think the concern with that is that he's a reliever and a reliever who has been bad in the past, so
This is the
it's in
first time
there.
hearing of this. This is the first time hearing that relievers are volatile.
Yeah, I think that it's kind of funny because like it's the opposite conversation that we were having earlier, but like Sandy and Zach Gallen, where it's like, you don't want a project, you want players that are playing good, right? But also, like, if you've been playing good, then, it's kind of like the home run derby thing where it's like guys will hit 40, 30 home runs in the first half and then they'll hit like 10 in the second half and people are like, oh, the home run derby messed up their swing. And it's like, well, they weren't going to hit 40 home runs in the first and second half, right? So, um, yeah, honestly, like, I think he's just thrown the ball so well. I think that that's probably the type of guys that they do need to target anyways. So, I think he kind of fits the best of both worlds where he's not going to cost you the same amount that a Clase or a Duran or a Jax would. I think like the reporting on the Twins guys is that they want two top 100 caliber prospects, right? And so that probably means that you're giving up like Savage or Namala And then like because one of those guys is really kind of like middle, and then one of those guys that are like pushing up like out of that starting pitching group. So I'm gonna prospect hug a little bit and say that I think that Bednar is probably better for a cheaper price.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's the second part there. That's probably the more intriguing part. I think you can
Yeah.
get a better deal on him.
I really like Coulomb.
Is he your, and we might get to this in just a few moments, but is he your flag plant guy?
I think so. I think that he's the one guy that like I think that they should be in on. I think he kind of fits where he gives you a year of control after this one as well. And you can kind of use him in a lot of ways. He's been really good. And like we just talked about the price, like to me, he is should be like the number one target for them.
Yeah, and I think that's probably about the right answer there. I think that David Bednar is probably the best option, all things considered, for the Jays to go out and try to swing something.
Do you have any other relievers that you're intrigued by? There was a starting pitcher that we didn't talk about that I do want to bring up quick.
Go for it, go
If
for it,
you're good on relievers.
go for it.
Okay, Dylan Cease.
Jays have been linked to him.
Yes, they have been. What are your thoughts there? Like this is an ace level type, right? Yeah,
I'm super interested, I think, actually, if that's someone that you can go out and get. Obviously the results are not as good as the process, it seems like. You know, the expected ERA is almost I think a full run lower, maybe more.
he's basically this year's Yusei Kikuchi.
Exactly, right? So the bet there is that he's gonna come in and and dramatically improve in the second half. I
Do
don't know what he would
you
cost,
do you
but
think
I
that
think
the Padres would accept a package of Joey Loperfido, Will Wagner, and Jake Bloss?
I don't think so, no. But I don't know what that would cost because the Padres are unique in that they're looking at
They want
back.
major league talent, right? So
So who
I
is the
think
major league talent?
Loperfido
Is
would
Davis Schneider a
is
guy maybe you look at dealing? I don't know if he has as much value as Loperfido, but he's certainly been the better player this year and has more track record. So I wonder if maybe he does have some additional value.
yeah, I would say that like just based on an age from an age standpoint, like Loperfido is the guy that they would probably prefer. Although,
I don't
actually
think he's
they're
that
both
much older.
26. They're both 26, so never mind. Yeah, I think Loperfido or Schneider kind of fits
Here's
what the
here's a
Padres are looking for.
here's a crazy thought. Ernie Clement.
Uh yeah, I mean, he doesn't really fit the Padres though, does he?
I mean, he's a top five, top 10 defender in baseball, and he's had a really strong year. I wonder if he's a guy that maybe makes some sense for the Padres to target as a potential. I mean, I'm not sure who else would necessarily be part of that package. Is it like I mean, the Jays certainly want to extend him, but is it like Dalton Varsho? Is that who we're talking? Do
I
you even look at moving him? I can't imagine. But
yeah.
who who would the Jays deal? Is it Bo Bichette? That makes no sense. Then you've got a
Just
huge hole at shortstop. So who's the major league talent that you're going to deal to the Padres for Dylan Cease?
Yeah, I'm just looking at the Padres roster. And yeah, like obviously they would also need to backfill their rotation. So I think if you're looking at a Cease type, you're probably like a Loperfido, like maybe Adam Macko and whatever, a lower level prospect that AJ Preller loves or whatever. But yeah, I think a
But
Cease,
is Loperfido major league talent enough for the Padres to make that deal? I guess you're betting on the team control. There's so much more team control, obviously, with Loperfido.
yeah.
But I'm not sure the fit there in terms of ad would be nice. In terms of what
What
it
you're
would take
giving
to,
up, yeah.
I'm not sure what that is. I would love Dylan Cease as a Blue Jay. I think he would be probably, if not Bednar, then Cease is my guy.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure what that's gonna take.
I mean, I think Cease is like if you can, figure out his issues a little bit, like he's your number one. Like that's a playoff caliber
That's a
starter,
playoff
right?
starter. That's a playoff starter.
So yeah, I think it would be certainly intriguing. It does complicate things that the Padres are like contenders and looking to trade him. Um, yeah, I don't know. The fit for the Padres, I think would maybe be a little bit weird, but I think maybe if you were to, could like say that they love Joey Loperfido or say that they love Jonathan Clase, somebody like that, right? Like a guy who's in the minors that has been in the big leagues, or like say they love Pinango, like those are like guys who are close enough to the majors that I think you could probably sell them as like major league talent, but would be an interesting fit. Are there any other players that interest you that you want to talk about before we can kind of get into some other stuff?
Well, I think we've kind of covered everything here. I think that it's really just they're gonna have to get creative, I think, for a lot
Yeah.
of these maybe mid-tier guys if they do want to make a deal there. But we'll see if they end up shopping at the top of the market or if they ultimately look to maybe fill kind of the floor guys and see if they can maybe protect themselves from any potential injuries or any potential unexpected circumstances.
Let's do the farm system talk because I think one of the things that is like really a positive development this year is that they've had gotten um some their farm system is like taking a big leap, right? Like, and it's a farm system that's firmly probably in the top 15 of baseball. Like, if you could convince me that it's top 10, sure, or like pushing top 10, maybe not top 10, but and that helps you at the deadline, right? Like, that's they're gonna be trading from this thing, which is like almost a strength for them at this point. um but I wonder for you, who would you be more willing to part with? And I'll group them out for you. So we kind of talked about the pitching, right? I think again, Namali Savage are in their own tier. I think JoJo Parker, like, you don't even talk about trading him at this point. And then you've got like the Steven Stanifer, King, Rojas, Jaron Watts Brown group, which is a group of pitchers, and I think that they probably deal like two of those guys. I think that probably fits. And then you have like this outfield group, like RJ Schreck and Pinango. I think you group them together. And then you have like the 4A types, the AAA major leaguers who are like Loperfido, Clase, Wagner. Oh, we'll put a Relvis in there. Like, who of those are you more willing to trade, and who are you not willing? Or like, who would you be less willing to deal?
I mean, I think that obviously if we're talking at the top of the system with the Namala and the Savage stuff, I mean that's it's going to take something special to return that. So let's focus in on that pitching group. I think that for me, given the potential exodus really that the Jays starting rotation could be looking at, I do feel like you're probably trying to hold on to the guys that are closest. Now, who that is exactly, I'm not totally sure. It does seem like you're looking at trying to keep, Cal Steven. He seems like he's pretty close. Gage Staniver's a little further away. Maybe he's a guy you look at dealing. Johnny King, I mentioned earlier, is pretty far away. Maybe Jerome Watts Brown already in Double A and has acclimated there. I wonder if he's a guy you look to keep. Like, to me, I think the lower minors is where you're probably looking at pulling from the most, which in the Jays sense is probably a strength because they've got so much potential down there in the lower minors. Maybe the upper minors, there's starting to leak up there, but right now a lot of the farm is at the the Dunedin, Vancouver kind of area. So I think nobody's untouchable. I'm not gonna put that label on anybody. I think that would be pretty dramatic. But I think I would be reluctant to deal Cal Steven. Everybody else, though, I think you could probably pry from me.
Yeah, it's yeah, I think you kind of touched on it great. I think, yeah, basically the pitchers that I outlined, two of those, I think, I'm fine with them kind of deciding who they would want to keep from that group and who they would want to trade from that group. And then the outfielders, I think one of Shrek and Pinango kind of makes sense. Obviously, Shrek is a little bit older, so um, that's probably a preference if you're gonna trade from that group is like one of the others. I would imagine that Aurelvis just doesn't have a ton of trade value right now, given how the year has gone for him. He's hitting the ball a lot softer, and just kind of it doesn't look like the same level of prospect that it did in the past. And then beyond that, like Victor Arias, Charles McAdoo, um, those types of guys who are playing well but are still at double A or lower. Like I don't think that obviously you want to like keep players that are playing well and kind of are rising up the ranks a little bit, but I also, again, this is a good chance for the Blue Jays to kind of go and add and take a shot at winning the World Series.
Exactly that, right? If you can go out and you can make a move, you can't let yourself get hung up over those
On
types of
like a lower
guys.
level prospect. Yeah, 100%. All right. Before we go, let's do what we'll do a realistic, not ideal, because ideal deadline is like Joe Ryan, Cade Smith, Gino Suarez, and again, I don't think that's quite realistic. So let's your ideal realistic deadline for these Toronto Blue Jays. And you
All
can
right.
just the players that they're getting back. We don't have to get into who they're trading away.
Okay. I'm thinking they add a starter. I'm thinking it's Mike Soroka. Probably Michael Soroka
Okay.
makes the most sense there. I'll say Michael
Calgary's
Soroka,
own.
Calgary zone. I'll say they add two relievers.
Which
I'll say
ones?
one of them. I'll say one of them is Sir Anthony Dominguez,
Oh,
and the other one is let's say Danny what were we calling
Coulomb.
Columbi Coulomb,
Coulomb.
Danny Coulomb, and I'll say chip shot for a bat, probably someone we don't even have on our radar, but I'll leave it at that.
All right. All right. I don't mind it. That's a pretty fair deadline, I would say. All right. For me, I already talked Bednar. Bednar, put him in the Blue Jays, put him in blue. I'll take Coulomb as well. I think he kind of fits as a lefty. And then from a starting pitching standpoint, I'll say Steven Matz, just to be different from Soroka from you. Little reunion, maybe you get him back in the Pete Walker pitching lab, and he kind of finds his form that he had when he was with the Blue Jays. And then I'll say like some other kind of another reliever who's kind of further down the list, like a Jake Bird type or like a Phil Maton, and they go and do three relievers, so your bullpen is really stacked going in because maybe they don't go out and get a starter. And then I'll say from a bat, Willie Castro. They do Willie Castro, and he comes in and he fills in kind of everywhere. So you're looking at Bednar, Coulomb, Phil Maton, Steven Matz, and who did I say? Willie Castro. And so, and then of course the Cardinals guys, you can trade for them together. So that's only four trades instead of five.
You got a busy day, is needless to say, is what you're
They
expecting.
gotta start making the moves like today. They got to get ahead of it. Anything else you got? Deadline? Any names that we didn't mention that you're interested in? Harrison Bader? Any
Paul
thoughts?
Skeens, Paul
Paul
Skeens.
Skeens?
Listen, deadline's coming up soon. I'm sure we'll have some emergency pods once the Jays do make some moves, but clock's ticking. Let's get moving.
Yep, it's the Yankees have been active. The Mariners added Josh Naylor. I think the time to strike is now, especially if you're planning on or if you're planning on being busy, then you know, like if you can get ahead of it a little bit. If you're going to acquire a Sir Anthony Dominguez, do it today so he doesn't pitch against you in this series. If you're gonna, get Ramon Laureano, like again, do it today so he doesn't hit against you in the series would be I think pretty ideal scenario for them to have them just kind of swap locker rooms ahead of the game. But yeah, I think that's going to do it here for us today at the Bird's Eye View podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in, and make sure to hit the subscribe and like buttons if you're watching on YouTube. You can find us there at the Bird's Eye View podcast. If you're listening along on the audio provider of your choice, make sure to drop a follow and review. You can follow us all on Twitter. I am at Worden_Zach. Jori is at Jori Negin-Shecter, and the pod is at BEV_pod. Thanks so much for listening, and enjoy the deadline.